name is Heather McGee, and this is the Happily Never After, a podcast that explores how life's endings can lead to a personal breakthrough. Because sometimes the end is just the beginning. Welcome to the Happily Never After, a podcast where we explore how life's endings can lead to a new beginning. If you enjoy the show, don't forget to rate, review, and follow us wherever you are listening or watching the show today. It's a great, easy, free way to support us, and it does actually matter. Our guest today is Sarah Hilmer. I know Sarah because we used to work together a few years ago. I've been following her family story for the past few years, and I wanted to invite her on to talk about it. Sarah's amazing. She is a mother of three. She lives, works, and adventures all around the San Francisco Bay Area. She is a social advocate, a community builder, a trail runner, which we talk about at times because we both love running. And she is most happy when she's in the forest or at the ocean with her kids. Sarah, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Heather.
Why don't we start with a little bit of context so people can get to know you? Today we're going to talk about medically complex families, which I think a lot of the experience of that is not something a lot of people talk about so much because it is hard to talk about. So you can feel kind of unseen. And I know that you've been going through a whole journey. Can you start back at the beginning and tell us what is your family story?
So my family story is probably bigger than a single podcast. So I'll take you back to some context setting. It was the middle of the pandemic, and I found myself pregnant with our second child, which is fantastic. So my partner and I, Ben, already had a 4-year-old at the time, Annie, and we were just elated to be pregnant. So she was born during the pandemic, and it was an interesting home birth, but overall very healthy baby. So we were living kind of isolated as a family unit, quarantining during the pandemic. And we started to see, some signs that she might have trouble eating. For example, she didn't want to take a bottle, kind of things that were borderline normal, in the range of normal for a kid that just had some eating preferences. So fast forward to August of 2021, and she was hospitalized for RSV. And again, in the range of normal for the pandemic, a lot of kids were getting RSV at this unusual summertime just because we hadn't been around each other. And so she was hospitalized, and they did some x-rays and realized that she really had a lot of fluid on her lungs, which was just unusual because she had really only had, a little bit of food and mostly breast milk. And so fast forward to our first appointment at Stanford Children's in the San Francisco Bay Area. And our beloved ENT doctor told us, okay, she's thriving by every measure. So probably there's some sort of internal cleft. The only way to know if there's a cleft is to go in surgically and see if there's a cleft. And so he said, probably what's going to happen is I'll get in there, I'll sew it up. She'll be as good as new. It's a 15-minute procedure. If any,
Can I ask you, can you explain what a cleft is for people who may not be familiar with that term?
Yeah, sure. So a cleft is just an abnormality that you can have externally. I think a cleft palate is one that people are familiar with, where it might just be abnormal way your mouth is shaped or underdeveloped. And in Juju's case, I'm getting ahead of myself a bit, but she ended up having some clefts. So the doctor told us, if it's simple, I'll fix it. If it's not, I will call you. So that first surgical moment for our kiddo in September of 2021 was terrifying. And sure enough, he called us and said, wow, she actually has a type 3 cleft, which meant that the back wall of her airway and her larynx actually had a deformity in which it was barely connected. So he described it as it looks like the tissue inside her airway had tried to connect, but it never completed it. So really what was happening is every time she was swallowing, she was slowly aspirating into her lungs for her entire life. And he said, we're going to pause today. I'm going to end the surgery, and we're going to talk about next steps. So over the next 6 weeks or so, my partner and I had a lot of decisions to make. We found out she needed to have this big operation, a double stage cleft, laryngeal cleft repair, in which they would actually use rib cartilage and reconstruct the back of her airway. So we were at a crossroads at that point, and we had to make the decision of whether or not our kid Juju should get a tracheostomy, which would allow her to breathe out of her neck, so she would have the surgery and come out of it with a trach, or if we wanted to have her have the surgery and be completely intubated upon waking up, which means that she would be sedated and basically heal for a few weeks. So this was a crunch time for us. We spent 6 weeks talking to like everybody we knew in the medical profession. We decided to go with the trach because we wanted her to not use her ability to move around. So I'm gonna like cut some parts out of the story for length, but she had that surgery. She had a tracheostomy placed. The first stage of her rib graft was successful. It was a 9-hour procedure. Just one thing that was unique for me about that is it was really the first time I had taken a break from breastfeeding her at all, because that was really the
Yeah.
only way she could safely eat. So it was, even though we were expecting this big surgery, it was like, okay, she's actually away from us for, a day. It was a very odd
Yeah.
experience. She had a successful surgery. They repaired the back wall of her larynx, and she came out of that with a trach. And at the time, that felt so extremely overwhelming to Ben and I. We honestly felt like it was a death sentence. Like I don't know how many of the people listening to this have had a baby, but they are just absolutely perfect. Their skin is perfect. They're perfect no matter how they come. And to
Yeah.
have somebody actually cut into her airway and now she had a thing coming out of her body was just, it was hard. It was hard to accept. So
Yeah.
we stayed in the hospital and we learned how to actually do tracheostomy care. And the idea was that she was only going to have it for a month or two. That was what we originally
Hmm.
thought. We were
Yeah.
trying to be able to go home with it possibly. So she had her second stage of that procedure and she did great. However, she was not yet really able to breathe through her mouth and her nose. So Ben and I had to learn how to do all of our home health care. And yeah, for brevity, I'll kind of skim through this, but we got discharged on Christmas Eve from the hospital. She went home with a trach. And what that means for her is a lot of suctioning. So she has a machine that we carry around, to help her get mucus out of her trach. She has to have around the clock breathing treatments, or she did at that age. She needed to have every 4 hours, she would have a breathing treatment, which means that we're putting albuterol and other medications actually through her trach just to keep her airway not swollen. So at the time, we did not have home health care. And
Yeah.
Ben and I were doing everything. We were staying awake with her 24 hours a day. It was extremely overwhelming. I mean, that was
Yeah.
the year 2022 for our family. It was either us with all eyes on her at all times, or it was her catching something like RSV or the flu and ending up back in the hospital because she needed even more support. She has since had another 15 surgeries. Like that was just the beginning of the road that we had with her. We actually thought it was going to be about a 6-week surgical
Yeah.
operation and she would come out without a trach. But to this day, she is a thriving 5-year-old who still uses a tracheostomy to breathe. She's had a number of other kind of conditions pop up, things she's working through. Eventually, she'll get her trach out. But we very much changed our tune. It felt like we went from being really scared and how are we going to live with the trach to it actually being the most life enabling thing ever. So yeah, that's kind of where we are today. I'm happy to go into more detail.
Well, what you said is something I think is really interesting, and it actually matches what a lot of people on this show. Because a lot of people that come on here to talk, they're telling a story that's really hard, like something that was devastating or really traumatic, or brought them to something they just did not know how to handle it, and it's really overwhelming. And what's interesting, they look back at it. They say once they work through the shock and figured out this new way to live and this new way to manage, they actually found not joy that it happened. I'm not going to pretend that these things are amazing or anything, but they did find joy in life. That it wasn't, they're able to find a new path and that they're not stuck back there forever. And I think sometimes people can feel when these things happen, it's over. Everything's over. This is going to be terrible. But
Yeah.
then after some time, and you give yourself that time, you start to realize that it can be okay. It's unexpected. It's a new way to live, and you maybe have never lived that way before. But I think that's really interesting. Now, can I ask you
Yeah,
with
and
the
actually,
go ahead.
can I comment on that real quick?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So we in 2022, in the midst of that really hard year, Juju actually got her trach out in the hospital, and
I
we thought it
remember
was the
that.
end of things. Yeah, it was this joyous time where for 24 hours we were like, "Look, she's breathing on her own. We think she's ready for this." And then all of a sudden, while we were in the ICU getting her trach out because we thought the road was over,
Yeah.
she just started crashing. And it was, I mean, some of the very worst days of our
Wow.
lives. she ended up getting COVID and destatting, and we had to go into an isolation room as a family. But actually, we came out of that experience realizing that rearranging our priorities a bit, we went from the end goal was to get the trach out. And
Yeah.
all Ben and I could think about was how are we going to enable ourselves to get the trach out? And we left that experience of like, oh, no, no, no. The end goal is for Juju to survive and for her to
Yeah.
live her life. And if the trach, I might cry talking about this, but if the trach is the thing that gets her to do that, like we are all about the trach. So we actually
Yeah.
left that specific hospital stay in 2022. We left with just a renewed sense of our priorities in life. And I remember we actually, from the isolation room at the hospital, I booked a camping trip for us, which we had never really, taken her taken her camping. It was like a really big leap, but like for Ben and I and our family culture, that's really important. I think sitting in the
Yeah.
isolation room, we realized like, oh, we're going to take her out of this situation. We're going to help her live her life with the trach. And from then on, she's lived a relatively normal life just with the trach enabling her. But it was so important for us to kind of change our tune on that and realize life was not over. It was just a different way of living.
Yeah, I love that because I love the way you talk about that the goal is for Juju to have a happy, fulfilling, wonderful childhood, and if a trach is
Yeah.
something that makes that happen, it's not getting rid of the trach, it's
Yep.
Juju having an amazing childhood,
Yes.
and that's what helps her do that.
Yeah.
I love that. You said something on social media that I really wanted to ask you about because I think it's an interesting discussion. You had talked about there's a doctor. I would imagine at this point you have dealt with maybe 1,000 medical professionals throughout your time.
Yep.
And you had had an interaction with one medical professional. I think it might have been a doctor that talked about fixing Juju. So everyone,
Hmm.
Sarah's daughter's named Juju. That's who we're talking about today. And he had used the word fix about fixing Juju, and you had some things to say about that. So, what is your perspective when someone says something like that?
Yeah. So it's such a great question. Just think if you're using the word fix, then you're intending to say that there's something wrong with her. And I think she's perfect the way she is. And I am so glad for medical advancements that allow her to breathe in a different way. And also for others that need medical devices, whether it be a walker or a wheelchair or a cane or hearing aids. I could go on and on about all these different medical interventions. We're so lucky to live in a time where we can have these supportive devices.
Yeah,
So I think from that lens, it's important not to say directly to Juju that we need to fix what's wrong with you because it's
yeah,
so out of her control. And as a 5-year-old, especially, she gets it. We really try not to explain or not over index on if you do all these
yeah,
things, maybe you can get your trach out sooner because it's not
yeah,
really in her control. She was born with this internal abnormality that, I would love to flip a magic switch and change it so her life's easier, but there's nothing actually wrong with her. And then I think the other way that it kind of comes into context and conversation with medical professionals is that there are medical professionals that are trying to get the airway to replicate
mm,
exact perfect airway, perfect being
okay,
what most people are born with. And we actually are working with a team of surgeons at Stanford that are just trying to work with her airway. And so what that means for her is she still has a condition called I'm forgetting what it's called medically, but it is basically there's floppy tissue still inside of her
okay,
airway. She's always going to have this tracheomalacia, sorry. She's always going
okay,
to have this that goes on for her. And so our doctor's thoughts on it are we're not going to cut that out because something is working where she's able to eat by mouth. She's able to talk. She's able to run around and have enough energy. It's not actually blocking her airway. So why would you take out something that she has been thriving with, even though technically most people don't have that in their airway? So you don't want to over fix or, do too much cutting on an airway because at the end of the day, like it's the aerodynamics and we're happy that our surgical team sees that and is able to kind of
yeah.
like work within that. Yeah.
Like it doesn't need to match everybody. It just needs to work for Juju, whatever that
Exactly.
looks like.
Exactly. And I really that's a good way to kind of approach like all of these medical instances, right? It's like what's going
Yeah.
to work for the kid. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So being your friend and following you on social media, I could see after Juju was born, and I am dead positive you didn't talk about all of the things by far. But it was very clear that y'all were in the hospital a lot. You had mentioned 15 additional
Yeah.
surgeries. You were in the hospital a lot. It was during COVID. And something we haven't said too much here, y'all have another child, an older child as
Yeah.
well. Juju was getting sick, at times fighting for her life. How did you manage being in the hospital so much? And I have to imagine the stress was overwhelming over a prolonged period of time. How did you
Yeah.
try to manage that?
Yeah. I'm so glad you're asking because I feel like people don't talk about this enough. I mean, our community and our family is how we actually logistically managed it. And I do want to get into kind of the impact on my 9-year-old, but most of the time, Ben and I were able to be in the hospital with Juju, and we had this
Yeah.
long 2-month stay. And then I would say we were in and out of the hospital for like maybe we were probably inpatient out of the next 12 months of the year
Wow.
2022. So it was a lot of time. And fortunately, my mom was actually retired early just to be able to support our family, which is such a gift to us. We had our friends and family like lined up to support us. This is going to be a lot of tears in this. If you're listening, you can hear me crying. I mean, we had friends that were just signing up to go take our dogs on a run. We had our car broke down and we had a friend come bring his tools into the parking garage at the hospital and fix our car. We had meals. When we were in the isolation unit, a friend actually got a bike and a bike trainer so we could still work out while we were in the hospital. I mean, there was just this copious amount of support for our family and the love that we felt from that. I mean, that's actually like how we managed it and how we got through it. Now, also giving each other the gift of rest and understanding what Ben and I needed, like, giving each other time to get outside and get sunshine, to get sleep, figuring out who is better at talking to which teams of doctors and like dividing and conquering like you would in any other way with a partner that you might care for your kid. So it's getting through those logistics. But I think going back to the 9-year-old, that is probably where my mama heart is still the most sensitive about the whole entire thing. Because there was a time where it was really hard to prioritize any of Annie's needs because Juju's
Yeah.
needs felt like they were life and death. And I think she's in therapy now. We're in therapy now and like working through some of this. But when I like think about those times, that's probably like the only piece of it where I felt like just blind to what was going to happen.
Yeah.
I had been parenting both my kids so well and then got in the hospital and it was so easy just to say like, Annie, you got what you need. You're healthy. You're not on a ventilator right now, so you're going to be okay.
Yeah.
And I think when we got out of the hospital, like she wasn't okay. Like we had just like left for some months at a time. She's okay now. She's thriving and she's, the
Yeah.
best older sister. But we had to really do some like repair work with her and work through some of these big feelings of abandonment that she had and my feelings around maybe not giving her all the attention. But, at the
Yeah.
end of the day, we made choices to be with Juju in her biggest time of need. And, Annie really felt the brunt of that, I think.
Yeah, and I have some personal experience with this too, in that many of my siblings are medically complex, as well as in my community. And I'm glad we're
Mm,
talking about this because it is so hard because you have people in your family that are fighting for their life. They're
mhm.
fighting for their life. And I
Yeah.
think sometimes when one child has so many critical needs, and then if there's another child in the mix that doesn't have those needs, they can kind of feel like they're not there, they're not present. And it can be so
Yeah.
hard to manage as a parent because obviously you care about both. One is fighting for their life, and
Yeah.
you can't be in two places
Yeah.
at once. It is so
Yeah.
hard.
Yeah. I think that's exactly right. And I think in Juju's situation in particular, we had to be at the hospital doing the
Yeah.
tracheostomy care. We don't have home health support. So
Yeah.
it's physical. Sometimes it takes two of us to be supporting Juju in her very, as you put it, critical time of need. And so it's not even a matter of like we don't want to be both places. It's that both
Right.
all of our hands are needed on Juju.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that? What does that entail? Because I think a lot of families find that out because a lot of people don't have home health care and they have to learn
Yeah.
how to be a caregiver themselves. What does that look like for you all?
Yeah, I mean, I have to give credit to my husband here because he is constantly making the choice not to work full time so he can be with her. And he
Mhm.
is primarily, I would say he's her primary caretaker. So what it looks like, what she needs, has evolved greatly over time. When she first came home from the hospital and she had a relatively new tracheostomy, we had to tread so lightly with it, getting placed in the correct way so we didn't, hit an artery, or we had to make sure that it was clear all the time because it was a small size since she was so tiny, and we couldn't let any crusted mucus get in it or it would block her ability to breathe. So at the beginning, for that, I would say 18 months of coming home from the hospital, one of us was awake with her at all times. So we split shifts sleeping, which is also just, wild that I was back at work and we had another kid. I mean, it was a lot of like
Yeah.
sleepless nights.
Did
Yeah.
they give you like, did you have any sort of alarm system? Like if she, or was it just you just had to watch her
We
and see
just
if
had to
something happened?
watch her. We just
Oh,
had to watch
wow.
her. And this might be a conversation for another day, but I mean, it's unfortunate and fortunate that she's not on oxygen, but that is the key word that would trigger the healthcare companies to give us home health support. So
Oh,
Juju doesn't
okay.
need any oxygen to breathe, and therefore she's kind of this downgraded case of like, oh, the parents can watch her. But in reality, a trach can get plugged. There's a lot of other things that can happen that would require quick intervention. I mean,
Okay.
this is like we have 10 seconds to react. So, yeah, we have not had home health and we've just had to have awake eyeballs on her at all times.
Do you
Yeah.
still need to do that even today?
No. So we've evolved a bit from that as she's gotten more stable. She's had more surgeries that have just given her more airway clearance, for example. And now my husband still sleeps next to her, but you can very much hear if she needs support. That
Okay.
being said, scary things happen all of the time. So the biggest risk to Juju is that her trach either falls out of her neck or it gets clogged by dried mucus, which is like called a plug. And in
Okay.
both of those situations, it requires us to place a new trach extremely quickly. For example, one time she was playing and oh my goodness, this is a side story, but my husband had an ACL repair surgery and she tripped actually on his crutches and it just took the trach right out of her neck. And I mean, she
My gosh.
immediately like can't breathe. So and of course he had just had an ACL repair surgery, so he's not running. I'm running,
Yeah.
to get the new trach and put it in and all that. But more recently than that, we've had a middle of the night emergency, and it was a really silent emergency in which all of a sudden she was getting that dried mucus inside her trach and all of a sudden she couldn't breathe. And so she did end up going unconscious and Ben had to deploy CPR on her. And this is a year ago from right now. So even though she's overall better and these situations are very infrequent, when they do happen, they are life or death. And like we always have to have somebody around her that understands how to put a new trach in. And then real quick,
Yeah.
just to like connect back to my 9-year-old Annie, I mean, she's a part of all of these emergencies. Like, she has been with us every time we've had to call 911. She saw Ben doing CPR on her sister. There have been times where paramedics have come to our house and we've had to give Annie a job to do, like put the dog in a
Yeah.
different room, or we
Yeah.
need you to watch your little brother because we have to handle this emergency. So
Right.
she is playing an active role. We try not to ask her to do these things, but as a 9-year-old, like she also is part of how we all keep Juju safe. And for better or for worse, that's like something that is very real for my 9-year-old.
Well, you mentioned something that I wanted to ask you about. I know in me becoming a mom. So for anyone listening that doesn't know, I had twins and they were born 4 months early.
Mm.
Um and they're called micro preemies. It was not on the level of Juju at all, but it was a year and a half of hospitals and it was really scary. And what you're making me think about, I know you had a tough birth experience with Annie, and then with Juju, all of this is happening. And then you have a son, a new little baby who came after
Yeah.
Juju. And one thing that I didn't anticipate is the trauma of motherhood that like you carry with you. It doesn't go away. And you just like, you think you, like, deal with it, and then you move on, and I don't at this point, I don't think that's how life works at all, especially in motherhood. These things happen, and you just continue to carry it. It
Yeah.
sounds like things went a little more smoothly with, your son, but
Yeah.
how did you had to have been really scared, I'm just gonna guess.
Yeah. Yeah. And thank you for sharing about your twins. I mean, just to go back to that real quick, I don't believe that there's any stack ranking of traumatic things that happen with us. There is no, Juju is worse or this kid is better off. It's like
Yeah,
while we were at the hospital, I mean, we saw it all. There were cancer patients. There were kids with much worse than Juju, much, like worse from our perspective because they needed more medical interventions. I guess harder journey is what I'm trying to say. But
Oh,
that all, like, no matter what your experience is, it's like people are going through a variety of things and it's hard. So I had to bring a lot of intentionality to the birth with Reggie. And thanks to my midwives, really worked through it before. So I've had home births for all of my kids, which is
mhm.
lovely. But I had a feeling, or I kind of knew that probably where Juju had her big, most recent emergency where we had to deploy CPR, I knew that was probably the room that Reggie, our now 10-month-old, was going to be born in.
Yeah.
So I told that to my midwives. I was holding it during my pregnancy. I felt that it was
Yeah.
heavy. I was working through like this grief and just be feelings of fear. And I didn't want to bring that into the room. And so my midwives and I actually did some like somatic practices and a lot of just like talking through how do you think about like this space and bringing new life into the space and like the energy that is the birthing process actually being
Yeah.
a clearing for some of that grief. And not that anything can like clear completely away the trauma that we're going to hold from our experiences with Juju forever. But I do look at it as, Reggie has brought like this new end of life into our family. Like he's enabled Juju to be a big sister. He's,
So cute.
kind of, he's also just a very cute, adorable, chubby baby. And also, it's wild because his age right now is when Juju started having her medical intervention. So
Okay.
you talk about this idea that as moms, I don't think we're ever fully letting go or over the trauma that we experience. And that is so true directionally both ways. Like I look at Reggie and like sometimes I'll just look at his neck and think like, how on earth did we make the choice to have a tracheostomy cut through Juju's airway? Like
Yeah.
that's still wild to me. But also on the other end, we have a baby who is eating really well and sleeping really well. And to get to experience that in a way that we haven't really experienced since, our 9-year-old was a baby. It's
Yeah.
very healing, and it's such a relief to have that in
Yeah.
in a baby. Yeah.
Well, and too, and then listening to you talk about this, when there are children that have major, major medical complexities that need to be managed and dealt with, I think you have to fight really hard to bring out who they are as a kid, because there's a kid under there, underneath the tubes
Yeah.
and the emergencies and the ambulances. And there's a kid with a personality under there. Can you talk to us a little bit? First of all, Juju is hilarious. I love every picture of her. Can you tell us a
Yeah.
little bit about who she is, what she's like?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. This is my favorite question of the whole podcast because she is like so uniquely Juju. And
Mhm.
actually, I've pondered this a lot. It's sitting in the hospital because so many medical professionals would say, at least she won't remember this. It was like the tagline that everybody used.
Oh, wow.
So, we would be like in a very low point, and a respiratory therapist, for example, would say, like, she's so little, she won't remember any of this. And I just don't think that's true. Like, I actually think her experience is fully embedded in her personality. And because of what she went through when she was younger, is like exactly who she is today. Like, she is so tough. She is so empathetic. She wants to be a doctor when she grows up. Like, I think her experience, to be very specific, she wants to be a bone doctor. So, anything with x rays,
Okay.
anything with bones, it's
Okay.
a very, very big thing for her. I mean, it's made her who she is. And I think that her personality, was had already existed before her medical situations, but also was
Yeah.
just probably further propelled by them. And just to like who Juju is. So she has a head of fiery red hair. But if I said that out loud, she'd say, no, it's orange. Like she's like specific and has this like immense vocabulary and is like a firecracker in a way that like she knows how to like land a pun or like say something that's going to have everybody laugh or like bring back a memory where we're like, oh, you were really paying attention. So she's constantly revealing just like how smart, how witty, how just extremely like full of life she is at all times.
I love every picture. I mean, first of all, y'all have a beautiful family. Y'all go on so many adventures. But every picture of Juju, it really strikes me because, like, I think your friends do know a bit about what you all have been
Yeah.
going through. And to see a little kid that loves life, obviously, so much. Now, I did have a question for you that I was thinking about here. So, a lot of times, parents that are dealing with medical complexity over a long period of time, their marriages don't make it, or their partnerships don't make it. I mean, mine didn't. And, I know many other people that have gone through similar things, and it just didn't make it. Y'all seem so happy and loving and wonderful. How did you manage that? Because it is a real issue that a lot of families deal with.
Yeah. I mean, my partner is just like fantastic. So I think that we just approach our marriage as like we can kind of work through anything. Now, when we said anything, we neither of us expected that it would be like this shared challenge, right?
Yeah.
The expectation is like I would have a thing or Ben would have a thing or we'd be fighting or whatever. And in a way, having somebody that we both like love so immensely much and both fighting for her life together has made us stronger. And that is so not the story for so many people, and I don't wanna downplay it
Yeah.
like it's not stressful or we haven't had our challenges because we absolutely have. But actually, hospital life gave us a really unique opportunity to give to each other in these ways that were, like, very tangible. Like, I had to leave the hospital room for 1 hour every day and go on a run in the
Yeah.
sunshine. I had
Yeah.
to. Ben had to be able to go into his, like, corner of the hospital room and sleep for a 4 or 5-hour chunk. It was like we were
Yeah.
able to block everything else to make that happen for each other, and I think a lot of times in, non-medically complex marriage issues, it's, like, harder to kinda cut through all the other life things you have going on, but because we were in a hospital together fighting for the same thing, we really, like, got back to the basics and were able to care for each other in some pretty down to earth ways, and I think coming out of that experience, we are continuing to do that and care for each other. And it's not perfect, but I think we definitely see the value of like our commitment in marriage and are trying to make it work at all times.
Uh, I used to read a lot of articles about this, and there were a few things I read that I made a lot of sense for me. It talked about, and this would be my guidance to anyone: go overboard to be kind to each other.
Mm,
What I saw is that the overwhelming stress, and if you're in the hospital all the time, probably your partner's the only person that's there that you feel like you can take it out on. Really try not to do that, because that chips away at your relationship over time. And to really go overboard with kindness, like you mentioned, please leave for an hour, like, because you feel
yeah.
guilty. And I think in
Yeah.
some couples, they get upset if the other person leaves for a break. But I would say flip the script, make each other leave for a break every day, because nobody can survive being so stressed out for such long periods of time without giving yourself a break. I do remember one doctor talked to me and said, "You've been here every day for 2 weeks, all day. Go home, watch a
Yeah.
movie, and don't come back till tomorrow." And that was
Yeah.
actually really helpful.
Yeah, and I wonder how much of outside the hospital walls we could just be doing that for each other in relationships, right?
Yeah.
Like knowing what your
Yeah.
partners desire and giving that to them the time and the space to do that. I think Ben and I continue to do that for each other. Where whether it's like making sure I get out on my trail run or making sure he has time to do, he's
Yeah.
very creative, a creative project or, see friends. I mean, that to us, it's like a gift that we're giving to each other every time we make space for each other to do what they love.
I think that's perfect. Facebook mom groups are sometimes make me a little sad by the things that sometimes people post. But
Yeah.
there's a pattern. I don't know if you see this often, where people are asking for permission. Like, I just had to ask if it's okay if I go to Target for 30 minutes by myself. And I really wish we could flip it around and encourage each other to take a break. Hey, you haven't seen your friends in a while. Maybe y'all could go to dinner this weekend. I'm happy to, you don't need to worry about anything. I'll take care of it. And I really wish, instead of, like, everyone should ask for a break. If you feel like you need a break, ask for it, and then please say yes to that person. But it would be so much kinder and better for your relationship to flip it around and encourage each other to take those breaks, like, proactively. You've been holding down the fort. You need a break. Please go take a break. Don't worry about anything here. I wish we would
I
do that.
love that. And I think that is helping your partner feel very seen. And it's coming, the way you said it, it's coming from a place of gratitude, which I think often in relationships, that's what we want. I desire for somebody, like I know coming off of Mother's Day yesterday too,
Yes.
I desire for somebody to be like, thank you for everything that you do.
Yeah.
And I think when paired with like, I see that you had to be up with the baby in the middle of the night for the last 4 nights. Do you want to sleep in tomorrow morning? It's kind of pairing that like gratitude for what you've been doing with the like, I see what you might need. And I think offering those things, to our partners is such a gift.
Yeah, for sure. And then if maybe it gives your relationship an opportunity to grow and evolve and deepen rather than, poking holes in it where maybe there's a lot
Yeah.
of repair that needs to be done. Now, this is a show that's all about life's endings, life's big challenges, and then new beginnings. How has this experience changed you?
Yeah, I think I mean, it's fundamentally changed who I am as a
Yeah.
person. Like, I think there's a lot of elements here, but I'm just gonna kinda, like, say a few of them. So, for example, advocating for paid leave for families.
Yeah.
I've done more work on that in the last few years and just seeing the catastrophic outcomes that happen when parents can't be next to their children in the hospital. I worked and continue to work for a company that was able to give me the time I needed with my family. So I think that's a very practical way that like this experience has changed how I relate to and think about even like some of our public policy. And then I think as a human, it's just made me enter every relationship through a lens of empathy. If somebody's not getting back to me right away, or if somebody can't make space for me, or is I'm sensing they're overwhelmed, I just assume that they are overwhelmed with something. Something is going on in their life. Like we all have these things that we're going through. And the way that like my friends and family were so gracious about communication. And I would, again, the tears, I would go through periods in the hospital where some of my very closest friends would reach out and just be like, "Hey, how's Juju doing?" And I would just not respond for like 2 weeks because I was so
Yeah.
overwhelmed by that question. But yet my friends would just keep saying like, "Don't respond. I'm thinking about you. Don't respond. I'm Venmoing you money for a Phil's coffee." And just like
Yeah.
the way that people showed up and continue to show up is just so beautiful. And that's my biggest takeaway is I want to be that person for my community. Like I want to be the person that's just there when people need me. Even if I don't know what to do or what to say, you just have to be there. You just have to take action and like send that little nugget of like, I'm here. I'm in your corner. I got you. Whatever you need or whatever you don't need, I'm here for it. And that's how it's changed me. Is now I feel like I look at my entire life through a lens of who is our community? How am I investing in our community? How am I living alongside my neighbors? And how am I, just pouring into other people's lives in a way that really matters?
I love that, and it is so different, I think, from maybe standard, United States culture to a degree a lot of times.
Yeah.
It's personally for me, and you may disagree, I'm not sure. I feel like there's a lot of in it for yourself or
Yeah.
prioritizing yourself at the actual expense of other people. Like, it's not about collaborating and finding something that works for everybody, it's, "This is how I want it, and I don't really care how it
Yeah.
impacts other people." But when we do it the way you're talking about, like, man, I remember the kindnesses people have shown me, all by themselves. Like I still remember a friend, my brother had died, and my best friend, she just dropped off a bit. She's like, "There's a bag for you outside." I was like, "What?" And she had gone and got all my favorite snacks, a six-pack of beer. And
Yeah.
that meant a lot to me. I didn't have to
Yeah.
ask. There were things like that all the time that people don't forget that. It
Yeah.
actually makes a huge impact for lifelong.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think also just the let alone when you're in the hospital and you need that bag drop off or that meal drop off. It's like, what are the ways that we're just going throughout our week and can maybe make things easier for each other? We'll do a lot of like ad hoc weeknight dinners of like, I'm already cooking double the spaghetti that we need. Come on over.
Yeah.
Then you don't have to clean your kitchen tonight, friend. So there are just like a lot of ways that I think constantly being in community with other people goes such a long way and can, make us all feel loved and cared for.
Yeah, it makes your life so much bigger.
Hmm.
I know your life has stabilized more. I know
Yeah.
still a road ahead, but has stabilized more perhaps than it has been in the past. For people that are listening that might be in the trenches of it or even in the hospital right now, what would you want to say to them?
This is such a hard one because I feel like people's experiences are so different. I think I would start by saying, like, what do you need? Do you need to talk about this? Do you need a meal? I'm going to show up with some like freshly baked cookies. You can't go wrong with that. Like showing up for them in the moment and figuring out what they need. I think I've learned some big life lessons, even that are, different from our experience, where we have an end goal, which is eventually Juju probably won't breathe with a tracheostomy. And of course,
Yeah.
it's embedded to her personality, and it will always be a part of her, both with the physical scar and also like her life story. But also, we know that like there are steps for us to be a less medically complex family. But we have people in our direct network where that's not the case. They might have gotten a diagnosis that their lifespan is cut short, or they might have just a more dire outcome. And I think all you could do is start with like what do they need to hear, what do they need in the moment, and really meet them in that.
Yeah, and something you mentioned earlier too, and to me it's simple, but I actually think it's like one of the most important things you could do. Give yourself a break. Like I think especially
Yeah.
when you're in it, and I think we have to say not all children make it. Some of these stories have endings that I don't think anybody wants.
Yeah.
And when you're going through that process, like I remember when my kids were in the hospital, there were other parents and we talked about it. And they're like, I just have to do something. Like you need those little moments of joy. It's medicine. Like I think if you think
Mhm.
about it as medicine, it is something to help you go through long term because you really can't live in that darkness all the time. You have to give yourself a tiny little break. And really, that's the original definition of self care. Self care is about taking care of yourself so that you can energize and get back out there and live to fight another day. It's actually really important to do those things.
Yes, absolutely agree.
All right, I have a big question that I ask everybody. Sometimes I get really funny questions, and sometimes really profound things in life. What do you know for sure?
I know for sure that if I invest in my children and enable them to be the best versions of themselves and enable them to be whoever they're meant to be, not try to put them in a box, I absolutely know that that's the best investment I can make in humankind.
Love it. Sarah, thank you so much for being here and sharing your family story today. I know like I have empathy because these things, like once you make it out, I think a lot of people don't want to talk about it anymore. It's too hard,
Mhm.
bringing those feelings up again. So I really appreciate you being willing to share your story and go back there a bit. Where can people find you if they want to hear more from you or work with you?
Yeah. So I'm on Instagram at Sarah Hilmer, and I do share a lot of Juju content on there. So if you want to see like the biggest personality that exists in the universe, feel free to follow me. It is a private account, but I'm happy if you send me a message, I can let you in.
Yeah, and I just have to tell everyone too, Juju has these beautiful curls and it's just like the biggest smile. I think she's smiling in almost every picture that you
Yeah.
post. She's such a funny little kid. I love it. Thank you so much for being here. And thank you to everyone who is listening to the Happily Never After today, especially those of you who are on your own journey. We hope you have a great week.